Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Derek Pratt, Director of Education here at the Erie Canal Museum. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to pass it over right now, though, to Angela Chandler.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angeline Chandler. I'm the Vice President of Planning, leading the Reimagine the Canals initiative for the Canal Corporation. And I'm very excited to join you today for the launch of our second year of the Erie Canal Artist in Residence program. And we partner with the Erie Canal Museum on this. This is our second year. This is a wonderful program that's bringing art to the canal and asking our constituents, our stakeholders, our users to look at the canal in a variety of ways. This year is very exciting because we're doing that through photography. So we have 3 artists this year. Last year we had just 1. So we have all 4, though, here together tonight to talk to you about the work that they've completed and the work that they will be doing. So I'm now going to turn it over to Derek Pratt, again, our partner at the Erie Canal Museum, to tell us more about this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Angeline. And thank you all again for being here. So the impact of the Erie Canal has been immense, socially, economically, politically, and artistically. And here at the Erie Canal Museum, our mission is to engage the public in this story of the Erie Canal's transformative impacts on people and places in the past, present, and future. That's why we're so pleased tonight, in partnership with the New York State Canal Corporation, to welcome our artists and residents to discuss their respective projects. This lecture is part of our larger Deeper Dives series, where we'll examine some of the most kind of cutting-edge research and projects on the canal and in both the history and present with experts in the field. Our next 2 Deeper Dives actually will be looking at Thomas Cole and the Hudson River School. So if you're into art, highly recommend checking those out, including in March, Dr. Sasha Scott from Syracuse University, who will be framing the Hudson River School through the field of Indigenous studies with an emphasis on the impact of colonialism. But now on to tonight's main event. We will be first looking at the work of 2023's Artist in Residence, Matthew Lopez-Jensen, and then we'll be introducing the projects of our up-and-coming 2024 Artist in Residence, Alon Koppel, Clara Riedlinger, and Judit German-Heins, who have fascinating projects for us ahead. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion amongst everyone, and finally a Q&A where you'll even have a chance to speak if you so choose. Please, if you have any questions during the talk, put them into the chat, and we will try to answer them as best we can at the end of the talk. All right, so without further ado, Matt, take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm excited to be here and also excited to hear about the next projects coming. FYI, I was told that my talk should be around 30 minutes. Is that right, Derek? Okay, so I'm going to try to keep it to that. I only have 140 slides, so I'll talk fast, but let me get to that right now. If you saw my talk on Zoom or live at the Erie Canal Museum in May, there's only a couple same slides. Everything else is new. So let me share my screen, and someone can shout if it's not working properly. Here we go. Now I'm gonna play the slideshow. Start. How does that look, Derek? Okay, you can hear me. All right, so I am gonna jump right into it. The kind of guiding title for my year was The Work and the Water, and that's probably gonna stick with me for a bit. I just wanted to start with thank you so I don't forget, but thank you to the Erie Canal Museum, New York State Canal Corporation, New York Power Authority, and the Horn Dorset Artisans Residency, which I stayed at for a month in June. And Derek and Natalie and Hannah and Renee and Elizabeth and Angeline, Bill, Shane, Alyssa, Chris, Connie, Elizabeth, Justine, and everyone on the team. These are all people who I interacted with in one way or another to make this year possible, as well as all the section managers of the canal system who I interacted with by email and who were helpful in making a lot of this possible. And then, of course, to all the employees who keep things running, the actual guys and men and women who work out on the canal. And I have all these names because I sent everybody a letter, and I'll get into that later. But thank you to all of those who sent in texts, and for those of you who keep the canal running. So I guess I'm going to quickly just mention a few things. The first few months of my residency, luckily and thankfully, were devoted to research. And so I spent hours and hours just mining through books and reading books and images, and it's been a kind of exciting. It's one of the most exciting things about being an artist in residence is the sort of how you might migrate from not knowing much to knowing too much. And so now I'm excited that I can look at just about any historical map or photo or image of the canal and oh, I know exactly where that is. I've been there and I've taken a picture of it. I also had the chance to go to the Scano Center and learn about the indigenous histories along the way. And those were kind of all important things I wanted to frame my time on the canal with. So just knowing a little bit about the geological, hydrological history, the indigenous histories and the futures, and then of course the labor histories and the continuation of care along the canal. So these are sort of just, every one of these had piles of books and reports and everything I could get my hands on for the first few months. I got my hands on them. And so over the course of the year, I visited every lock, every lift bridge, every lighthouse, most of the old aqueducts, and so many local landscapes. And it is an obsessive amount, and it's too much, but that's a challenge I wanted. And I'm excited that I have been to all these places with my camera and on foot. And the project started with this sort of research, but also with this engagement of the employees. And so before I was really deep in the field, I sent basically employees who worked in the field and throughout the system. Let me just move this, I can't read. Were mailed a personal call for participation, and each letter contained a thank you note, a postcard, and 2 hand-decorated blank cards for participation, and a stamped return envelope. And then this was the first time canal employees would have interacted with or even heard the phrase visiting artist in 200 years. And so it was really hard to predict how the outcome would be. And the contributed texts that I did get, they helped to define the finished series of work, and they helped to guide me along the canal. And the text will be included in a future book, and they'll always accompany the future photographs in some way, so that the labor and maintenance of the system is never lost to the beauty of a photograph. And the actual handwritten artifacts will remain in the archive at the Erie Canal Museum. Okay. So just to what does that mean? So basically, this is a pile of like a kit that I had to build, and for 400 people, and I had to know exactly which one of them was going. Every person got a sort of signed, personalized letter, and then explaining what this thing was, and the postcard, and that's me going to the post office. They're all divided by the sections. The section managers then helped get them out to the staff, and the staff had however long they needed to fill out one of these cards that would have looked like this and send it back to me. And slowly over the course of a few months, they started to trickle in, and this is what a few of them would look like. So they all had these little dots or embellishes in the corners. So I'll just read a few of them. I'm going to stop and read a few along the way until I start to run out of time. So, for example, a lot of people don't understand what a dredge boat actually does, or the process involved in this job. Also, a lot of boaters don't understand the need to contact a working vessel before going by us. And this is, I think, the same handwriting, so it's probably the same person. I work in the levees during the winter. I deal with cold temperatures and slippery conditions while running heavy equipment, sometimes on high levee banks that are narrow. It can also be difficult to clean the tracks out at the end of each day due to the dirt and snow freezing up. And so this is a really perfect example. I asked in my letter to staff, I was like, don't write to me, write to someone else who works there, someone who knows the language. Don't worry if the language you use, the words you use aren't understood by the average person. And so a good example of like this language about dredge boats, next a few months later, I'm basically on a dredge boat, and it helps to inform the pictures I'm taking there. It makes being on that dredge boat super exciting. And so I spent a lot of time just photographing the mud at the bottom of the dredge boat. And so as I'm moving throughout the system, there are certain because of these texts flowing into me, there are these little red lights put over different things that I may not have been able to see properly otherwise. And so here's one that says, I'm a welder and rehab valves for locks for four valves per lock. And it keeps me busy as we do all the valves from Waterford to Fort Edward and the Erie Canal's Fonda and all the other sections out west. And then over here is an image that I took of, it was like a welder's section of the Waterford workshop, which is just one of my favorite pictures from inside that space where a lot of the work is happening. And this is one of my favorites, degreasing gears, nice and simple, very blunt. And I was really hoping for just some clear declarations of what happens, maybe some angst mixed in there, some appeals, and just some storytelling. And so there's a lot of that happens while these collected. And this is just this really huge gear that is at the Waterford Lock that I photographed actually before that one came in. And then now all of a sudden seeing this giant gear covered in grease means a little bit more. And so here are a few questions and ideas that guided me while I was moving throughout the canal system and surrounding landscapes. And so I'll get to some of the final work in a minute, but these are just sort of the questions that are on my mind. Whether or not it's, becomes the final work or not is different. So what needs maintenance in a scene along the canal? And of course, the answer is everything. But a picture like this that I took out in Montezuma, all of a sudden, for me, I love it as a composition of line and water and stone and trees, the cottonwoods, the little weather vane up there. But then from a maintenance standpoint, I'm seeing tree removal, embankment maintenance, lawn mowing, painting, metalwork, cement repair, lock operations, and then this nonstop commitment to the yellow and blue color, which they find very creative ways throughout the system to articulate everything with. And so another question that's always on my mind, because I do so much work in environmental spaces, is how can the Erie Canal be a tool for ecological restoration instead of degradation? I don't think anyone's going to argue that nature loves the canal. It does so many things to the landscape that the landscape wouldn't naturally do. And this is a historic example of most of the lumber from the Midwest just slowly pouring down the canal. And so thinking about its impact on our surroundings as we look at the future of the canal is always on my mind. So an image like this that I took at Fort Lyons is just sort of kind of symbolic, this red clover and chicory blasting out of a crack. Obviously somebody reading this might say, oh, this needs to be repaired. And someone else reading it might say it's being repaired by nature. And then an example of an image like this that I took in on the Cayuga-Seneca Canal. I loved it for a composition, the space, the different placement of objects, the sort of precision of everything. But at the same time, I'm also kind of anxious about the amount of grass. And so as a way to think about the amount of biodiversity that could be increased, when I see grass, instantly I'm thinking, how to increase biodiversity, stormwater management, reduce maintenance needs, and increase community engagement, because everyone loves to look at flowers. And then who is not using the canal matters a lot, and that's always on my mind. And so when this happened, and all my contacts said, oh, did you see this in the New York Times? For me, it was kind of a faceplant, because I'm always thinking about who is not using the canal. And so who owns a boat, who doesn't? How many boaters are from out of state just passing through? And who has the times and means to canoe or kayak, and who was raised around water access, who's comfortable and safe in dockside, campsite communities, which are kind of a requirement if you're moving through the space, and how can commercial anything return to the canal someday to reduce carbon footprints for ground transit. So this stuff is all kind of swirling in my brain as I'm moving through the space. And now that will kind of maybe inform and coat some of the images. And so what I did for this selection of images is I took the texts that I got from staff, and I took bits of metal that I photographed in the shops and the archive, and just went through it and mixed them all up. And so I started this image here. It's such a perfect example of a picture of nothing and everything at the same time. So this is like the last remaining vestige of original canal in Schoharie. And so if this moves outside of New York State or outside of the canal system, it's just a picture of stones. And maybe it fits in the new topographic school really well because it's so minimal. But I just kind of loved that and kind of thinking about how things change and migrate. And I just love the little mushrooms sprouting up too out of the ground. Yeah, and so I'll just narrate and sometimes I won't say anything about an image. I'll just move through. This is one of my favorite images because I was able to have this vantage point in front of a lock that is currently holding back the water and probably does it a lot. This is a dry dock, and so it's usually not flooded. And so the plants can come back, and then there's this fountain that comes up out of all the locks. As I was moving, this notion of work and water was always on my mind. So whenever I saw water doing something different, flowing in a certain way, bubbling, going down a certain kind of waterfall, I would photograph it. And so, yeah, this is one of the first pictures I took when I was really excited to get to on the Champlain Valley. Yeah, I sort of walked down this path outside the lock, and then it was spring and it was beautiful, and the Hudson River was there and the ferns had all popped up and the sycamore grove was just so beautiful and the light was amazing. And so it was the beginning, like one of the first trips to the canal system was this image, at least during spring. So it kind of helped to remind me that there's all these beautiful landscapes surrounding most of the locks. So let's see here. These are long, but I just thought I'd include them because they're really great, and I love the handwriting. I'm going to skip them for now because they're long. I've run out of time if I read every one. Most of them are a little bit more succinct, but the equipment is manually removed by the Over the Hill gang. I think I'll just flag that. It's a sort of a reminder that the workforce is aging and that replacing equipment requires staff who knows how to do it, and so much of that is imparted by the people who are working there and have been learning it. And so much of the lock system isn't, on an iPad. The schematics don't exist and they have to be invented. I learned that from talking to them, getting a tour at the Lions dry dock. I had to visit most of the aqueducts, and I love how they have been preserved. Of course, that requires a ton of capital money and maintenance. This is a bit of a Rexford. This is a bunch of shavings I collected from the Waterford shop, and I have tons of it right in my studio. So hopefully these shavings and the metal bits will work their way into actual artworks coming forward. Full screens, I just threw some full screens. I have a bunch of the locks. I took every time I could get at the same advantage of lock, cement, water, I would take that picture. So over and over again, I had this recurring imagery. And if there's an image and you really want to know where it is, just like chat, where's that image? And I'll try to remember what one it was. But what I love is in my brain, all of these things I can now rattle out where they are. The reason we do tree maintenance is not just for looks. It prevents dam failures and blockages, important for water level control. And that seems simple, but it's also like a really important thing to think about because one of the bigger battles along the system is trees. People get attached to them, get used to them, fall in love with them like I did, and someone else might decide it's a problem. Like this tree. This is one of the most amazing cottonwood trees I've ever seen, and it's just one of the most amazing compositions I've ever had a chance to make because it has distance. I'm at eye level with the middle of the tree, and you can see the old lock system at lock 3 or 4 here with this amazing Stonehenge above water walkway and all of the blue and yellow on the hill. And so this is one of the earlier pictures I took, and it continues to be one of my favorites. The Waterford shop. This is Fort Miller, I believe, one of the few amazing vantage points that is not actually designed to be seen. You have to follow footpaths around fences to get to this amazing spot here. And now, of course, when I see one of these images like this, I've seen these lock gates sitting in the shops, and I can tell like, oh, okay, well, this one's probably scheduled in 5 years for wood replacement and metal repairs. All right, the most challenging part of the non-nav season, for me at least, is the whole pump out process. I was only really involved during the winter of 2021, but it's a lot of standing around in the cold, especially if you're smaller, less experienced canaler like I am. I can't lift much, don't have any kind of heavy equipment certifications or welding experience. Lots of waiting to hand other people whatever tools they need. And in my case, a fair amount of fitting into small places that no one else can reach. Hard work, but absolutely fascinating. I feel like we should actually dub this spot Erie Henge, because it should be like a stop on someone's Instagram tour, because it's such a cool artifact. And people have been photographing it since it was built, and I've found those old photographs, and it hasn't changed much. It's just starting to collapse a bit. One of the things I photograph whenever I find them were any mural at all about the canal or along the canal, historic ones. This is a bit of metal from the shop with a macro lens. Probably, Derek, you're gonna have to give me like some sort of like text or chime when I'm running out of time, because obviously with all the text, this is gonna go a little longer than I expected. I didn't really time it. So cottonwood trees became, for me, something to look for at all of the lock sites. They're a really important tree for the continent, and from indigenous perspectives. They're a bit of a medicine tree. They can heal your body. You can use the buds like aspirin. They're connected to willow trees in that way. And they also heal the land. And so they grow fast, they die quick. On timescales of geological timescales, they would grow fast, die quick, and then their bodies would help to regenerate that soil or whatever's been disturbed. So that's why all along the canal system, you'll find disturbed land, and therefore you'll find the first growth of forests, which are mostly cottonwoods, making the way for sort of mitigating land on their own. Right, so keeping the gates free of ice so that they're usable when we have to change them to keep water levels out of the river, at appropriate level. This is one of my favorite images along the Champlain Canal. It's just like, it's such a beautiful vista, but also you can see the immense amount of cement retaining walls that have to be keeping the water back. This log actually has some of the best trees in all of the Erie Canal System too. Some of the most amazing chestnut and catalpa trees. I'm not sure if they're red or loblolly or black pines, but these are dealing with a blight. And so when you go, these were planted by somebody with intention throughout the system, and almost all of them are dead or dying, which is sad. And so tree blight is something that I think about, study, and use with in other parts of my life. And so looking at healthy trees and sick trees is always sort of on my mind. How to tear apart the motors and control boards, rehab them, and put them back together. And that makes a lot more sense when you're actually looking at a control board. You see how complicated, but also how beautiful these objects are that are maintained so fastidiously. This is one of my favorite images of this enormous gate in Lockport, and this little sprout of water coming from it. And then there's a little sprout of tree of life in that corner there, of some species of flowers. Aqueduct that we've all probably visited or seen. Oh, I love this one. Saving animals from the lock chamber that accidentally fall in. I saved a Boston Terrier from the lock chamber at 28A last season. And so it's just one of those things you don't think about when you're at the canals, that, yeah, animals do fall in, and sometimes they have to get fished out. And this is just one of, I photographed every waterfall I could find. So what's really fascinating is how many different iterations of waterfalling there are throughout the system, going underground, above ground. Historic Lock 33, and really beautiful light, but also really kind of, 4 minutes?
10, sorry, this one. 10, all
10, okay, great. Sorry. I'll move a little fast. I didn't include any of the really apocalyptic images from this summer, but we all lived through the forest fire light, and this is the beginning of that light changing the atmosphere. And a few days later, I had to just run back home because I couldn't be outside anymore, and it was really scary. I was up at Sylvan Lake, and there was just like, it felt like the fire was just jumping across the lake, and the wind was blowing, and the skies were red, and something you want to forget, but hard to when you're looking back at the images. Today is a double day. This is my handwriting because I was listening to the story being told by one of the lock tenders. This is a today is a double day, so there's two of us. Most of the time it's me, and there's too many things to do in between running the locks, and it just doesn't seem safe. Something happens to me, there's no one around. Amazing black walnuts, Waterford. This was sort of my earlier adventures down at the end of Cayuga Lake. Oh, they have, and this was one of these beautiful aging murals that shows a woman helping to guide the horse or burro to. It's one of my favorite collections of cottonwoods, Nowadaga Creek. But what I loved about it was that it was a completely unmarked dirt road, and I just sort of followed it, and it ended up here. But it ended up that I wasn't alone, and there was a car there, and then I ended up over there a little worried, but then it was just like a grandfather with his son fishing and quietly around the bend. And it was just a really beautiful scene to be moving around. But also this cottonwood tree, if you were to look closer, it's full of woodpecker houses, and so it's also becoming a habitat. Another cottonwood, one of my first pictures. This is some of the filings from that are in my studio now from the cast-offs when they're retooling equipment and rebuilding the locks. This looks like a creature, but it's a drill press of sorts at the Waterford shop. A really beautiful light there, and so everything has this like portrait light, even though there are no people in there. The objects, the tools become sort of cinematic. All right, I only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to move a little faster. I don't have any way to tell where I am. This was a really amazing fishing hole. These two are over there. This is something that happens at almost every lock, is if you look carefully, there's somebody fishing somewhere. The day started for me the night before the flood. I was night man, water control. The waters came up so fast at lock 18 that I was trapped at lock with car being swamped. The grade 14 came in and got me out with a 10-wheel truck. Wow, what a day. And so I was hearing this story, I think in Baldwinsville. I was like, oh, you have to write that down for me. And so he sat and wrote it down. And so we've got that little bit captured. And this is just another amazing sort of glade. I found a few like these sort of towering forests of cottonwood trees. This was one of the first things Bill Schweitzer brought me to in Fort Miller. I believe, no, is it Fort Miller? Yeah, it's sort of a hidden gem. It's definitely, I love murals and I love folk art, and this is probably right up there with one of the best folk art murals I've ever seen. It's really quite big, and it goes in multiple directions, and the couple's name who did it are died. Opening valves to allow the gates to open. H2O is extremely strong. The gates will waver when the H2O has gotten into equilibrium. Very cool. Spectators are very impressed. Massive cottonwood. And I tried to visit as many of the historic canal sites and canal towns as possible. And this is another example of a really fresh mural on one of those little tiny bridges. This is the last stop furthest point north in the Champlain Canal. This really beautiful willow kind of doing its thing over the canal. And speaking of electrical equipment, this was Coast Falls. It is not the canal, but it's certainly the Mohawk River just around it is. And this relationship between infrastructure and water is something that happens a lot. And this is like I said it last time. My mind was blown when I went to Coast Falls, and the fact that no one I've ever met has ever heard of it, and it's so close and so big and so amazing is just sort of one of those things that I feel like needs to be solved somehow. This was such a cool historic site. It's I think Buttermilk Creek Aqueduct. And what was really neat about it is you can barely tell in this image, but there are wooden planks on the bottom of the riverbed here, and they are probably original to this canal. And so to see them still intact, I imagine they were put there to keep that particular section from eroding and to shore up the stone from falling in. It's just something I'd never seen before. More cottonwoods with forest firelight. This is one of the coolest pictures. I have it full screen, so you can't see the whole thing, but what an example of so many things happening at once. Like the object itself, this piece of infrastructure, this movable dam, is such an object, and it's also feels like a giant guillotine, and it kind of is designed like such to cut the river and stop it. And so it's something just to sit and contemplate. You see the landscape behind it, the river on both sides, and these chains kind of chaining the river. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go a little faster, and I should have edited down. Willow tree. The amount of work it takes goes into operating and maintaining the operational readiness that required lack of qualified help. This is one of these. There are a lot of railings and gates and things to look at, and so figuring out how to balance a composition with the lines there was a fun challenge. It's one of the lift bridges. And getting towards the end. Ready? And this is just another gate, but that green, I'm fairly certain this is a very particular type of toxic cyanobacteria that happens in standing water. So for me, it was like a red flag of like, what happens when the water doesn't move properly. And this is probably one of the most beautiful spruce trees I've ever seen. I've done a whole project on spruce trees. I'm kind of obsessed. They're also blighted. Most of the ones in the lock sites are blighted, but this is like a botanical garden specimen, Montezuma, I believe. And this is one of the first little fun facts. Like this is a kind of image that I wouldn't have known what I was looking at until someone pointed out that the decades of ropes wearing away at the stones at Schoharie made these little notches for them to sit in. Oops. Oh, I love this. There are a lot of homemade birdhouses and homemade little artifacts painted yellow and blue. And this is this wall of cedar or arborvitae that's probably been there since the canal was built. And I just love this composition with a wall of iron keeping the river, the gate, the birdhouse, this little weather vane on top of the birdhouse, and a biker in the back. All right, I'll pick one last one and read. Oh, I read those already. Okay, this was the, yeah. So obviously cottonwoods are a theme, and maintenance and labor are themes. This is one of my favorites. It's at the Dry Docks and Lions, where it's just you have so many things happening at once. You see the equipment, but you also see nature coming back and taking this little Queen Anne's lace there, sprouting out of the base. I think the whole process of communication between the different locks is something that is way more involved than someone outside of canals would assume. Lock keepers and to some extent boaters are always on the phone radio to each other to coordinate and make travel as seamless as possible for everyone involved. I'm going to end it there. I'm just going to, flash through the last slides I had. Oh, I do love this one though. This is just a list of all of the office actions that it requires. So answering phones, data entry, time entry, payroll. And it's a really fantastic list, which I'm sure will be on exhibits at the Erie Canal Museum. Canada largest cottonwood tree in the system, must see. And of course, this is such a iconic part of the system. And that is the end of my slides. And so I just do a few slides. We did an artist walk in October, and that was a lot of fun. Just a chance to meet some strangers, and one of our future artists in residence joined us on that. And I do artist walks generally when I do a project. At the end of it, it's just a way to to meet people I'm not going to meet in any other setting or on Zoom, and walk around and share stories and look at things together and talk and make some art together. And it ends up just helping embed the place and memory a little bit more profoundly than if I was by myself, or just doing a Zoom, which is so hard to pay attention in. And everyone on the walk contributed a sheet of paper where they took notes or did drawings along the way and shared facts. So my year is officially over, but the art making is really just getting started. I think any artist will tell you that time flies really fast. Will there be an exhibition? Looks like it. Hopefully opening at early February at the Erie Canal Museum. There'll be some photographs on a wall. Will there be a book? Yes, I'm trying to work on a small artist handmade book this year, and then potentially a larger book. The images we raised through are just the tip of a very large iceberg from a year of work. If you wanted to photograph your screen now, I'm gonna keep adding to the all 524 miles Instagram that I made for my year. It was a way for me to sort of capture things that may not necessarily be artworks, but are experiences. And then I can share updates about the exhibitions and the books there. And then if you want to just follow me in general, that's me, Matt Lopez-Jensen. And thanks again. See you soon and stay in touch. The end. All right.
Right. Thank you, Matt. Great stuff.
It's a lot. Thank you for sticking with me.
Yes, we're really looking forward to that exhibit starting in February. Please, everyone, if you can, come check it out. Also, just want to say you can look, you're going to get the recording of this video, and that'll also be on our YouTube channel, which Matt's previous lunchtime lecture regarding his work when it was happening is also available on there, as is a really interesting video with Ambrose Barbuto, an engineer with the canal system, on the maintenance that has to be done each winter in pump outs. We're also very grateful to the Winifred and DeVilo Sloan Jr. Charitable Fund, who is helping provide funds for Matt's upcoming book of these things. So keep an eye out for that. But anyway, now we'll introduce some of our next up and coming artists in residence. Maybe we'll just go by your order I see on my screen at the moment. So Clara, do you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I'll just start off introducing myself before I share my screen and some of my work. So my name is Clara Riedlinger, born and raised here in Rochester, grew up around the canal. And I was always fascinated with the history of the area known as the Burned Over District, which is the whole stretch of Western New York, really from about Oneida to the very end of the canal in Buffalo. And during the 19th century, there was a huge resurgence and revival of what we would call perhaps ecstatic religions. People were having all kinds of spiritual and otherworldly experiences, and it really swept over the whole region. And I've found in talking to people about this that people who are not from this area generally are not aware of this history, and even people who are from here might not be aware of it, and if they are not aware of how much it has impacted American culture as a whole. So I also, I guess, have been a photographer most of my life. I know my dad is in the audience, and he gave me a camera when I was very, very young, and it has just never left my hands. It's how I process the world. And so I started documenting the canal and trying to sort of make sense of this history a couple of years ago. And so I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to dive deeper into that work and to really have the canal's support in doing that and telling this history. So I will share my screen. All right, so Hopefully I don't go too far over time, but same thing, just, give me a nudge, when I need to end. Is my screen visible and good?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, great. So this is, of course, not a picture of the canal, but this is the parking lot behind the Talman building, which is this white building on the left side of the image. And I'll read this quote here from Whitney Cross's Burned Over District book, which is a wonderful history of the area. He writes, on June 23rd, 1843, the great tent descended upon Rochester. Crowds drifted into town from the countryside and sailed in from Canada. The camp meetings continued for 2 weeks. Thousands gathered under the tent to hear the truth, while prayer meetings filled Talman Hall to capacity. So at that time in 1843, this was really the peak of this religious revival. And it started off with groups of itinerant Methodist and Baptist preachers coming through the area and hosting these camp meetings, which at this point in the 1830s and 40s, when this was really taking off, this particular tent that they are referring to in this quote held about 3,000 people. So it really was this enormous impact on people's daily lives. And this was happening as the canal was just being built, beginning as early as the late 1700s. So one of the earliest moments in this history was the conversion of Charles Finney, who was one of the first sort of celebrities of this movement. And he had a personal religious conversion in the woods up in the North Country, just north of Adams, New York, which is slightly northeast of Oneida. And he wrote about his conversion. He says, no words can express the wonderful love that was shed abroad in my heart. I wept aloud with joy and love. I do not know, but I should say, I literally bellowed out unutterable gushings of my heart. These waves came over me and over me and over me, one after the other, until I cried out, I shall die if these wavers continue to pass over me. I said, Lord, I cannot bear any more, yet I had no fear of death. And Finney was what came to be called a perfectionist, people who believed that they had to create this perfect heaven on earth in order to usher in the advent, the second coming of Christ. And this was really the early start of what is now modern American evangelicalism, which obviously has a huge impact on, I think, how we all experience the world right now. So this photograph was taken approximately, go back there, in that area. And Charles Finney was also the person who coined the term the burned over district, writing, I found the region of the country in the Western phrase that would be called a burnt district. There had been a few years previously a wild excitement passing through the region, reported to have as having been a very extravagant excitement, and resulted in a reaction so extensive and profound as to leave the impression on many minds that religion was a mere delusion. He also wrote of his conversion, the Holy Spirit descended upon me in as a manner that seemed to go through me, body and soul. I could feel the impression like a wave of electricity going through and through me. Indeed, it seemed to come in waves and waves of liquid love, for I could not express it in any other way. It seemed like the very breath of God. So in a lot of these writings, people are thinking about things like electricity, especially as it relates to the water, with the canal being built and power plants being built along, hydroelectric plants specifically being built along the Genesee River and meeting at this point, was a very new phenomenon that was really disrupting the way that people experienced the world around them. So there's a lot of comparisons here between water and electricity and spirituality. Similarly, John Humphrey Noyes, who would go on to found the Oneida community, was at first a law student from Vermont who became a Baptist preacher and experienced conversion about a decade after Finney in 1831. And he believed that the Spirit of Christ was empowered with an electric fluid that could be exchanged from person to person, and that those who accepted Christ into their hearts would become charged with the energy of Christ. If we could live in perfect community on earth, and his version of community meant complete communism, sharing everything, including sexual and spiritual partners, that this energy would then build so much upon itself as to create a universal battery. And he was living in Ithaca and moved up and down the canal to preach at the time. In a similar time frame, about a decade after Noyes' conversion, we have Margaretta and Katie Fox living in Hydesville, New York, which is in Wayne County. Hydesville no longer exists. It's outside of Newark. But they reported mysterious rappings in their family home, which they claimed were the posthumous communications of a murdered man buried in their cellar. Eventually, they began to receive messages from nearly any spirit and to attract audiences that were eager to commune with any of their long dead family members, as well as people who just wanted to be moved and doubters who wanted to disprove the young Fox sisters. And their first public seance was held in November 1848 at Corinthian Hall, which is now the Holiday Inn Express on State Street, right on the corner of the Main Street Aqueduct where the canal crossed the Genesee River. And this religion that they created from this, the spiritualist religion, holds that there is no death, there are no dead. And this whole idea of resurrection and immortality was really permeating the whole landscape of Western and Central New York at the time. Just a couple of decades previously, an Italian scientist had for the first time made a frog's leg jump by sending electricity through it, which very much blurred the lines between life and death, human and God, and nature and technology. In the same way, the canal itself came to exemplify this dissolution of boundaries between worlds, itself being both man-made and natural, as Matt touched on as well. So backing all the way up to the very, very earliest people coming through and ideating on the canal here, many of these early colonizers and settlers pushing westward from New England believed that God had created this gap in the Appalachian Range at the Mohawk River Valley, specifically for them to come through. And they believed that it was their divinely ordained duty to continue the path of the Mohawk River where it stops at Oneida Lake, and to continue building a waterway that would go all the way through to the western edge of the frontier at the time, which would have been the Great Lakes at Buffalo. So they created this really rupture in the landscape with the Erie Canal. And so
minute.
What?
I was just saying, like, one more minute.
Okay, perfect. So a lot of these thoughts began sort of percolating in my mind when I purchased a home in downtown Rochester that butted right up to the old canal pathway, and I could see these remnants of where the canal had once been. And I started thinking about how images can almost serve as time travel and evidence gathering for these sort of hidden histories, these ghosts that exist in the landscape. So this is at the Main Street Aqueduct. And I started looking for evidence of the history that still existed in the present day. So my project is in some ways just documentation of that evidence of this spiritual history. I also am planning to include a series of portraits that will connect the people of the past to the present. For example, my friend here who lives on a communal, intentional community in the Adirondack foothills and is also a silversmith, much like many of the early members of the Oneida community. Or my friend Piper here, whose parents moved to Rochester specifically to be close to the history of the Fox sisters and spiritualism. So ultimately, I just want to propose the idea that there is something particular to this landscape that drives that spirit that we can still see bursting forth if we look closely enough. So thank you all very much. That was a ton to try to get through, and it's really only scraping the iceberg, but we have to be mindful of time. All right.
Thank you, Clara. Now let's move on to Alon.
Great. Hi, everybody. Let me share my screen. Start presentation. Derek, is my screen showing?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Alon, and I'm based in Catskill, New York. I have a fairly short presentation because I actually need to do the research and make photos through 2024. So I'm going to share with you a project that I've done called Middle Eastern Promises. I'm originally from Israel, and about 10 years ago, I found a set or bought a set of stereoscopic photographs from Israel and Palestine, and I decided to make a project with that. My project involved going back to the same locations and essentially photographing them again. There is a term called rephotography or photographic project, which is coined by photographer Mark Klett. He's an American photographer, was born in Albany, actually. And he went back and photographed the same location again in America. And I'm doing that, I've done that in Israel and Palestine. And my plan is to research old historical photographs of the canals and the locks and re-photograph them now and see the change in the landscape, see the change in architecture, and everything else that happened. And I'm going to show just some photos fairly quickly for my project here in Israel. The photo on the left is the old one, and here's my photo on the right. It's about 114 years later of the same.
Are you switching through slides?
Yeah, I am.
I don't think we can see it.
Oh, I wonder why.
You might be sharing your PowerPoint, not the actual presentation.
Okay, let me see. Sorry about that.
No problem.
It does say, let me stop sharing and try again. It worked before, but hey. How about now?
There we go. Now it looks good.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So that was my first screen. And while I was talking about it, you were supposed to see this actually. So this is my rephotography project. After I purchased a set of stereoscopic images, I re-photographed them in Israel and Palestine. And that's the first photo that I meant to show while I was describing the process. As I mentioned, photographer Mark Klett did that in America, and I did that in Israel and Palestine. And the plan is to essentially not necessarily look for stereoscopes of the canal and the locks, but look for any photographs, postcards, photographs, any documents that will include some kind of photographic evidence from years past and re-photograph that location to the best that I can. Within this project, I also combine the photos into what I call the blended image. So the same two photographs here. On the left side, you see the historical one, and on the right side, you see mine, which is about 114 years later, is combined to one blended circular image. These are mostly historical stereoscopes from a book that was done as a Christian tour of the Holy Land. So it's interesting, Clara, that you're dealing with the religious on your part, and I'm kind of piggybacking with that from my older project. And that's the combined image. This is in Jerusalem. And sometimes the combination of the images really created an interesting effect. So we have an older farmer here, while I only have the tools of the modern farmer on the right side. And in the combined image, they sort of merged together about 115 years later. This is in Haifa, overlooking the bay, and you can see how much changed in the new photo. It's a very modern city compared to what it was then. And that's my blended image. Back in Jerusalem, I'm very much interested in how the landscape changes over time, and most of my projects are related to time-based. I do long exposures or other things. My camera is mostly on a tripod these days, so I'm paying attention to composition, and I had a set of photos meet me, and I was able to dial it in as much as I can. These were all shot on film on a 4x5 camera, which I might use as well at the canal, or I might use digital. We shall see. It was very interesting to me to see how old roads and pathways were remained the same. This is essentially the same road on the right side of the photo as we see here on the left side. And that's the combined image with obviously new ways of transportation these days. This was an interesting one because I'm also looking at what happens when more and more people are visiting these areas. Obviously, the photographer in about 1897 was able to place models inside this tomb, while now it's enclosed and gated, and you can see how people are holding the gate and the paint is completely worn out in certain areas. I'm very curious about how humanity is now dealing with these places. And the same here in the church. They now have kind of very like brute police force gates that just usually are used for protest inside this beautiful church right on the marble floor. So I'm looking forward to doing that on the canal and see how many things have changed. I know a lot of things have changed. And even if it changed a lot, I think it'll be a value for us to see a photo that will have the canal and then a modern landscape that might look completely different, even if it's in the same spot. That's the combined version. And sometimes I would walk around for hours. This is in Jerusalem, try to find the right spot, and I would find it, and I'll be like, oh no, there is like a fence now and a satellite dish, and trees have grown, but it is what it is. You know, we have to be honest to the process. This is the original book that I mentioned earlier. Within the set of the photos, people also bought this, and they were able to look at the map and visit the locations, and each one would have a paragraph of text on that. Here's an example of how the photographs were mentioned. This is specifically a map of Jerusalem, a close-up. So some of these locations I was able to see, oh, number 17, where the photographer was. So I will be working with the museum, the Canal Museum in Syracuse, to try and find out historical photos and details about those photos as well. In this case, I did my own research, but I'm looking forward to actual some help with my residency. In the end of my project, I created a book, self-published book about it, Middle Eastern Promises, and we might do something like that at the end of this project. We shall see. I'm also very open to whatever happens. So if I encounter interesting people, I'm looking forward to making portraits of those people, the workers, the location, the workshops, and not just necessarily do this project, I think this brings me into a specific spot by finding the older photos, but I'm open to whatever happens there and then. I will be posting photos on my Instagram account and at some point also on my website. So here's my website and my email. But yeah, you can follow along on my Instagram account. And as soon as we start working, doing research, I will be sharing content there. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alon. Looking forward to that. So far, really interesting projects. And now we're on to Judit. So take it away. Sorry we're going a little long, folks, but hopefully you're enjoying it.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Judit German-Heins, and I'm very excited for my project. I will be creating images of female identifying workers and entrepreneurs whose work is related to the Erie Canal. As a photographer, using historical photographic processes, my projects connect present-day social political issues with history by my process and also by incorporating historical images. I will introduce my work with some of my previous projects. One of my previous portrait projects using tintype dealt with Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and xenophobia. In this project, I photographed women who covered their head for religious purposes. This project was born after after the election in 2016, when Jewish and Muslim women were attacked, and that's what made this project born. Another project of mine was about connecting present-day refugees with the history of immigration. In this project, I photographed refugees to exhibit their portraits with historical public images of immigrants who came to the United States before the mid-20th century. This is a Yazidi, and for all of these portraits, I'm using the webkit collodion process. That's my historical process that I mostly use for portraits. My tintypes provided the backbone of the Taking Roots exhibit and oral history project at the Raher Center for Immigration and Culture in Kingston. We collected stories of immigrants in Kingston and in the Mid-Hudson Valley, and I took 8x10 tintypes of the participants. Their stories are told in an audio format through a QR code during the exhibit, and the exhibit also incorporates quotes from them about specific subjects. I received my MFA in photography and integrated media from Lesley University in 2023, and my thesis project dealt with current social and political issues related to women and women's bodies through my personal visual stories. And let's get to the project that I'm working on now. This project is rooted in the canal's history as an avenue for not only transporting goods and knowledge, but also a pathway for spreading ideas of social and racial justice. The women's rights movement started with the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, which led to the nationwide movement of suffrage. At the time of the construction of the canal, women's employment was limited to factory, hospitality, and domestic work. In this project, I will photograph current female identifying business owners and employees whose work is connected to the Erie Canal. With this work, I would like to pay tribute to women who fought for gender equity and show how far we have come as a society since the early 1800s. The technique I'm going to be using are tintypes. The tintypes are made with the rapid collodion process that was discovered in 1851 by Scott Frederick Archer, a British photographer. And I use a large format camera, you can see on the picture, with either modern or a historical lens to capture the image. I coat the plate with a sticky substance called collodion, which becomes light sensitive after sitting in silver nitrate solution for a minute. You can see the silver nitrate tank in my traveling darkroom. And then I take it out from the tank and expose it and expose the plate. And then develop in the portable darkroom, and then fix it for a few minutes. And after washing for about 30 minutes, I have to dry the plate, and then I will scan it and varnish them to create a final product. For the final exhibit, there either be the original tintypes exhibited, or their scanned larger version, depending on the space and the exhibition design. I'm also planning on using historical images of women workers printed on fabric, and also incorporate stories of some of the women, possibly in an audio format, probably using a QR code, like what we did in the Rayer Center. So thank you very much. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you, everyone. That was great. Fantastic work by everyone, and looking forward to seeing everybody else's. So if you have questions, feel free. You can write them in the chat, and I believe you can now unmute yourself if you want. Please raise your hand, perhaps, if you do have a question and want to say it verbally. I have one of our viewers is telling, good reminder, check out Art Rage Gallery. Is in the exhibit place, I believe. I had a question for you, Matt. I was curious. You said that New York finds lots of fun ways to incorporate the official colors of the state, blue and gold. I was wondering what your most unique way you've seen the blue and gold utilized was. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, so somebody hand crocheted a cozy for a tree out of yellow and blue yarn.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah,
Hand crocheted hat from Natalie's mom. I believe they're watching. Cool. This is for Alon. Do you try to determine the lens used for original photos when taking your versions?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So for the stereoscope photos, I use a 4x5, which allowed me to move the plane of the image up and down, because those images actually had a lot of land in them and less sky. So I was able to kind of like go down from our regular view, which we can't do with a regular camera. We'll have to tilt it down, which will change the plane of the image. With these images, which would probably be more contemporary for the canal, I'm hoping to see a little bit more information about the photographer, about the exposure, and about the lens, and match it. So that's kind of my experience, looking at a printed image, going to the location, and determining the height of the camera as well as the type of lens they used, and matching it as much as we can. And if not, I'm also okay with cropping images to match it later.
Great, cool. Another question we had is Judit. What is the exposure time on your books?
Well, Yeah, I forgot to say that for my project, I'm going to use natural light. So with the exposure normally depends on the weather. If you're familiar with, if any of your photographers besides us, the ISO of the collodion is less than 1. So so the exposures can go several seconds if it's cloudy, or around a second, or a little bit less if it's sunny normally.
Great, thank you. Yeah, are there any other questions from the audience, or do any of our various artists have questions for each other?
I don't have a question, but Clara, I saw a show at the Catskill Art Center. I'll hit a link to it. It's somebody did a show of the benches from utopian communities in that region. Kind of a cool show. It seemed to be they basically looked at images of these communities and found the benches and then replicated them, I think, for the gallery. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. I'm definitely drawn to a lot of for some reason, like furniture buildings seem to be a really big thing in these communities, and obviously like probably everybody has at least one shaker chair in their home. And that came right out of this area.
Yeah, this seems like a good time to plug our friends at the Oneida Community Mansion House too. I talked a little bit about them. They also we had a talk on Jessie Catherine Kinsley, who created this incredible braiding work and stuff that's on display there now. Highly recommend people check it out. It doesn't look like there's many questions, but I want to thank you all again. One last chance for anybody to unmute themselves and ask a question. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming out. I know all of our current, our upcoming artists in residence, they'll be doing workshops at the museum at some point this summer, and be sure to check out Matt's upcoming exhibit in February. So thanks again, everyone. Hope you have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you. Nice to meet you. Bye.